They said the Caldwell estate could swallow a man's echo and still be hungry for more. Every hallway shimmered with marble and money, polished floors that never forgot the sound of shoes not meant to walk on them. Lena knew that sound. She worked in big houses before, spaces where the air itself seemed filtered through judgment, but this one felt different, quieter, heavier, like it carried its own secrets behind every drawn curtain. When she arrived that Monday morning, the mansion didn't greet her, it inspected her. The butler, a thin, silver-haired man with a practiced smile, opened the front door halfway, as if unsure she'd been sent to the right place. "Name?" he asked. "Lena Brooks." He hesitated just long enough for discomfort to grow roots. Then, "You may come in. Mr. Caldwell is expecting you in the West Study." The walk through the foyer was like stepping through a museum where time had been pressed between glass. A chandelier hung overhead, throwing diamond light across the portraits of men who had never smiled. At the far end of the room stood Henry Caldwell, the kind of man whose wealth didn't need introduction. It simply lived on him, in the cut of his suit, in the way he didn't have to move fast for the world to make way. He didn't rise when she entered, just looked up from his papers and gave a faint nod. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone clipped, "you come highly recommended. Let's hope that means something in this house." His words weren't cruel, not directly, but they carried the same temperature as the marble under her shoes. Lena clasped her hands together, her voice steady. "I'll do my best, sir." He nodded toward the staircase. "You'll find Daniel in his room. Mrs. Latham, the house manager, will show you where things are kept." And he paused, eyes flicking over her simple navy dress, her worn leather bag. "We've had issues. The boy doesn't take kindly to strangers. You'll need patience and restraint." The tone made restraint sound like a command, not advice. As she climbed the staircase, she could feel the house watching her, footsteps softened by carpet, the faint tick of the grandfather clock following her up each step. Somewhere beyond a closed door, a child's laughter broke suddenly into a scream. Mrs. Latham appeared at the landing, tall, neat, carrying a clipboard like a shield. "You're the 5th this year," she said under her breath. "He's driven out every nanny we've had. Scratches, bites, worse. Don't take it personal when it happens." Lena only smiled. "I don't scare easy, ma'am." The woman looked her over, not unkindly, but with the weary disbelief of someone who'd seen hope arrive before and leave in tears. "We'll see." The boy's room was sunlight and silence, curtains drawn halfway, a toy car overturned on the rug. In the corner, near the window, sat Daniel Caldwell, 8 years old, pale, thin, eyes that seemed too old to belong to him. He didn't look up when Lena entered. She stayed near the door first, didn't speak, just waited, letting the quiet stretch between them. Then she said softly, "Morning, Daniels." "Nothing." She took another step. The floor creaked, his head jerked toward the sound. His expression flickered with something like fear, then turned to warning. "Don't touch me," he said sharply. Lena stopped, raised her hands. "All right, I won't." His voice trembled. "They all say that, then they try." The sentence hung in the air, fragile as glass. Lena lowered herself to the floor, slow, deliberate, sitting, cross-legged by the door. She didn't look at him directly. Instead, she studied the toy car lying overturned on the rug. "That one's got a dent," she murmured. "Looks like it's seen a few races." A long pause, then barely audible. "It crashed." She smiled, gentle. "Did it get back up?" Daniel glanced at her for the first time, just a flick of those gray-blue eyes, but enough. "It's a car," he muttered. "Still," she said, "takes courage to keep rolling after a crash." He stared at her, confused, but he didn't tell her to leave. For the next half hour, she stayed quiet, watched the dust dance through the sunbeams slicing across the room. Every sound, the faint hum of the air vent, the soft clink of her bracelet, felt magnified. When Mrs. Latham returned to check on them, She looked startled to see the boy calm. "How'd you manage that?" she whispered once outside. Lena shrugged. "Didn't manage nothing, just listened." That evening, during dinner in the grand dining room, the air was heavy with unspoken evaluations. Henry Caldwell sat at the head of the table, fork resting idle on his plate, watching Lena feed Daniel soup spoon by spoon. The boy didn't resist. He looked peaceful. Henry's eyebrows tightened. "He lets you near him." Lena nodded slightly. "We're learning each other." There was disbelief in his laugh, short, almost bitter. "You'll see, Miss Brooks, give it a day or two, he always turns." She met his gaze, calm as still water. "Maybe, but maybe not this time." He leaned back, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. "Confidence looks good on you, let's hope it survives." Later that night, Lena walked through the quiet halls, the air thick with cologne and history. She paused by a painting, a woman in pearls, her eyes soft, her smile unfinished. A voice came from behind her. "That's my wife," Henry said quietly. Lena turned. "She's beautiful. She died 3 years ago. Daniel was there." Silence. He looked at Lena like a man who wanted to believe in something but had forgotten how. He hasn't spoken a full sentence since. Lena nodded slowly. "Sometimes silence ain't empty, Mr. Caldwell. Sometimes it's just full of pain with nowhere to go." He studied her, and for a brief moment, his composure cracked, a flash of grief, of exhaustion. Then he straightened, masking it again. "Good night, Miss Brooks." When she reached her room, Lena sat by the window. Outside, the estate lights glittered across the lawn like 1,000 watchful eyes. She exhaled softly. "Lord, let me keep my peace in this house," she whispered. Down the hall, faintly, came the sound of laughter, Daniel's laughter. Light, quick, and gone as soon as it appeared. Lena smiled into the dark. For the first time since arriving, she felt she might be exactly where she was meant to be. By the third morning, the house had started to breathe with her in it. The kitchen staff smiled now when she walked in. Even Mrs. Latham had stopped hovering at the door whenever she was upstairs. The rhythm of the mansion, once brittle and formal, had softened around her voice. But calm never stays long in places built on control. That morning, Daniel was in the music room. The light from the tall windows painted long bars across the floor. Dust motes floated like tiny planets in their own orbit. Lena sat beside the piano, reading from a picture book. Her voice low and warm. Daniel's hands hovered over the keys. He pressed one, soft, then another. The sound was hesitant, but it was sound, music alive again. Mrs. Latham, passing by, stopped in disbelief. She hadn't heard that piano since before Anna Caldwell died. "He's playing," she whispered. Lena smiled. He just needed someone who wasn't afraid of the quiet. And that's when the footsteps came, hard, echoing. Henry Caldwell's voice carried ahead of him. "Daniel, what did I tell you about?" He stopped short in the doorway. The scene froze, Lena kneeling by the boy's side, his small hand resting against hers. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, cold and sharp as glass, Henry's words cut through the stillness. "Miss Brooks," he said, "did I not make it clear that physical contact was to be avoided?" Lena stood slowly. "He reached for me, sir. You were hired to provide structure, not affection," he snapped. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." The butler and 2 maids had appeared now, drawn by the raised voice. Mrs. Latham lingered in the hall, face tight. Daniel's breath quickened. "No," he whispered, shrinking back. Henry didn't notice. He kept his eyes on Lena, his tone low but laced with power. Every one of them made the same mistake, thought kindness could fix him. It cannot. Lena's fingers tightened around the book she still held. Her voice stayed even. "With respect, sir, it isn't kindness that fixes anyone. It's trust." He gave a short, humorless laugh. Trust, you've known him 3 days. And he smiled today, she said quietly. That's more than he's done in 3 years. A murmur rippled through the staff. Someone shifted. A glass clinked faintly in the silence that followed. Henry's jaw clenched. For a moment, his eyes betrayed uncertainty, but pride rose faster. That'll be all for today, he said. Collect your things, we're done here. The words hit like the crack of a whip. Daniel's small hands flew to his ears. No, the boy shouted. Don't go. That stopped everyone. The maids gasped. Mrs. Latham's hand went to her mouth. The child's voice, clear and trembling, filled the entire house. Henry froze. Lena turned toward him slowly, calm and steady. You heard him, Mr. Caldwell, he spoke. For the first time since she arrived, Henry looked uncertain. The anger on his face faltered, replaced by something raw and frightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Lena knelt back down beside Daniel, her tone soft again. It's all right, baby, nobody's leaving yet. The boy leaned into her, trembling, the same boy who 3 mornings ago wouldn't let anyone near him. And in that silence, the kind that hums through your bones when truth walks in, everyone in that room knew what they were seeing. Henry Caldwell, master of the house, was speechless. A single tear slipped down his son's cheek, fell onto Lena's hand. She didn't flinch. Some wounds, she murmured, don't need walls, sir, they need warmth. Henry turned away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. His voice came out lower now, almost to himself. Resume your duties, Miss Brooks. He left the room without another word. That night, the mansion was quieter than it had been in years. The staff whispered stories down in the kitchen, about the boy who spoke, about the maid who stayed calm when even the father broke. Lena sat by her window again, watching the night press against the glass. In the distance, thunder rolled. The storm would come soon. She whispered, sometimes the storm ain't outside. Her reflection in the window nodded back, tired, steady, unbroken. The next morning, dawn crept across the Caldwell estate like a secret. Pale gold light slipped between the curtains, touching the dust on the furniture, softening the edges of a house built on order and grief. Down the hall, the quiet hum of life began again, slow, cautious, as if the whole mansion had heard what happened yesterday and didn't quite know how to behave now. Lena moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, the hem of her dress brushing the floor, the smell of fresh coffee wrapping the air around her like a kind of armor. The staff stopped what they were doing when she entered, not out of fear, but reverence. Morning, Miss Brooks, murmured one of the maids, eyes bright. Lena gave a small nod. Morning, y'all, let's keep things gentle today, the boy's waking up on his own time. There was a new weight to her words, a kind of quiet authority that didn't need permission. Upstairs, Henry Caldwell stood in his study, staring through the tall windows into the morning fog. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that small voice, "Don't go," cutting through 3 years of silence. He wasn't a man who believed in miracles, but something about the way the boy had reached for her, it unsettled him, not in anger anymore, but confusion, a kind of aching disbelief. He picked up the phone, started to call the family therapist, then set it down again. For once, he didn't know what to say. Lena knocked gently on Daniel's door. Morning, sweetheart, you ready to see the sun today? The boy sat near the window, knees pulled up to his chest. His hair was messy, his eyes still swollen from crying, but he wasn't hiding anymore. It rained, he said quietly. Lena smiled. That's all right, rain just washes the air clean so we can breathe again. He looked at her for a long time, as though testing whether her words were safe. Then he whispered, I dreamed of my mom. The sentence was a whisper of light in a house that had forgotten warmth. Lena didn't rush him, she just sat beside him, not too close, just near enough for his loneliness to feel less alone. What was she doing in the dream? She was singing, he said. The song with the stars. Lena nodded, her voice low and tender. Maybe we can hum it together later. He hesitated, then nodded. The silence that followed was full, not empty, the kind that heals. By midday, word of what had happened had already moved through the staff like wind through tall grass. The cook crossed herself whenever Lena walked by. The gardener tipped his hat. They'd all seen something impossible, and impossibility has a way of humbling even the proud. Mrs. Latham approached Lena in the hall. Mr. Caldwell's called for you, she said softly. He's in the study. Lena straightened her apron and wiped her hands. All right. She walked the long corridor, each step echoing against the tile like a reminder of where she stood, a worker in a house that never expected her to matter. Yet somehow she did. Henry didn't look up when she entered. He stood by the fireplace, staring at the photo of his late wife. His voice, when it came, was low. I owe you an apology, Miss Brooks. Lena waited. I misjudged. The way you handled Daniel yesterday, I don't have words for that. You don't need words, sir, she said softly. Just patience. The boy'll meet you halfway if you give him time. He nodded, his jaw tight. You speak to him like you've known him forever. Children don't need to be known, she said. They need to be seen. That line hung in the air like scripture. Henry turned, studying her face. For the first time, his tone lost its steel. If you ever feel this work is beneath you. She smiled, cutting him off with grace. I don't measure worth by rooms, Mr. Caldwell, never have. He said nothing after that, but when she left the study, something had shifted. Respect, unspoken but real, now lived between them. That evening, Daniel wandered down to the garden. The sky was deep blue, the air heavy with jasmine. Lena followed at a distance, letting him lead. He stopped near a patch of hydrangeas, running his fingers over the petals. Mom liked these, he murmured. Then we'll keep 'em blooming for her, Lena said. The boy looked up at her, a slow, steady look that spoke more than words. And for the first time, he smiled, not the shy flicker she'd seen before, but a full, living smile. She didn't say anything, just let it happen. Some truths don't need to be spoken, they just breathe in the open air and change everything around them. The house lights came on one by one behind them, warm squares against the dusk. Somewhere, faintly, the piano played again, a single, halting melody that drifted through the evening air. And if you'd been standing there, you could have felt it too, that quiet strength, spreading through marble and glass, teaching everyone within earshot what grace really sounds like. The evening came dressed in silver and perfume. A charity dinner at the Caldwell estate, crystal glasses, hushed strings, conversations that glided over loss like it was rude to mention. Lena didn't belong in the center of it, yet somehow the room pivoted when she entered with Daniel. The boy clung to her hand, dressed in a tiny suit that swallowed his thin shoulders. His eyes searched the crowd as if looking for a storm. Henry Caldwell stood across the hall, greeting donors, keeping his face trained into civility. But every few seconds, his gaze drifted toward the pair, the boy who finally spoke, and the woman who'd brought voice back into his house. Lena stayed near the edges, calm, invisible by choice. She knew how fragile peace could be when pride still sat at the table. Then it happened, the sentence that split the air. A guest, laughing too loud, said to another, "Imagine all those nannies, and then this one succeeds. Sometimes the help just gets lucky." The laughter died almost immediately, but the damage was done. Lena turned her head, slow and deliberate. Her eyes met the woman, not with anger, but with a stillness that could humble a storm. She didn't move, didn't speak. The silence was complete, filling the room until even the string quartet hesitated. Daniel squeezed her hand tighter. "That's what Mama did," he whispered, his voice carrying further than anyone expected. "She'd just look at people till they stopped." The words fell into the crowd like rain hitting dry earth. Conversations froze, heads turned. For the second time that week, the child everyone thought was broken spoke in front of witnesses. Henry's glass trembled in his hand. He didn't move toward them, he couldn't. Every lesson he'd ever learned about control felt useless now. The woman who'd spoken shrank back, mumbling something about meaning no harm. But Lena didn't answer. Her silence had already done the work. Later in the kitchen, the echoes of that moment still lingered. Lena sat with a cup of tea, hands steady but eyes distant. Mrs. Latham came in, her face a mixture of pride and worry. "You didn't have to stay quiet like that," she said softly. Lena smiled faintly. Sometimes silence does the teaching, words just get in the way. They both laughed a little, the sound small but real, the kind that carries peace with it. Upstairs, Henry stood in his study, the lamplight catching the dust in the air. He opened the drawer that held his late wife's journal. On a scrap of paper, he wrote 4 words learned from her silence and tucked it inside. He looked out across the garden where the moonlight touched the hydrangeas. Somewhere below, his son was sleeping soundly, his breathing soft and even. That night, Lena walked the hall one last time. The mansion no longer felt like it was testing her, it was listening. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded respect, but the whole house heard her anyway, because sometimes the loudest strength is the kind that never needs to prove itself. The screen would fade on her silhouette against the window, steady, dignified, bathed in quiet gold. Morning sunlight stretched across the Caldwell estate like forgiveness, finally finding its way through the windows. A week had passed since the charity dinner, since that silence taught a roomful of people about respect without a single raised voice. Lena moved through the halls as if she'd always been part of the house. The staff no longer whispered when she passed. They greeted her now with the kind of nod reserved for those who'd proven themselves under fire. Down in the garden, Daniel was drawing on the patio stones with chalk, little suns, and crooked flowers, his small hands smudged in color. Henry watched from a distance, his face unreadable. Every now and then, he looked toward Lena, as though searching for a word he hadn't said yet. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about that dinner." Lena wiped her hands on her apron. "I figured you might, sir." He hesitated. "The things people said, I should have stopped it." She looked up at him, calm as always. "You did, in your way. You let the boy speak for us both." Henry studied her face, no pride there, just quiet certainty. "How did you know what to do?" She smiled faintly. "I didn't, I just listened for what the room needed to hear." He let the words settle, then. "A woman like you shouldn't be hidden away in this house. The world could learn from you." Lena turned back to the garden. "Maybe the world ain't ready yet, but Daniel is." That afternoon, Camille Price, a journalist and friend of the Caldwell family, arrived to profile Henry's charitable foundation for children's mental health. But when she saw Daniel playing, laughing even, her attention shifted. "He's changed," she whispered. "Completely," Henry said, "and it's because of her." He gestured toward Lena, who stood nearby, helping Daniel trace letters into the soil with a stick. Camille watched for a while, then asked quietly, "May I speak with her?" Henry nodded. When Camille approached, Lena greeted her with the same unforced grace that had calmed the boy. "I heard what happened here," Camille said. "Some say it's a miracle." Lena chuckled softly. "I don't deal in miracles. Ma'am, just patience." As they talked, Camille's tone shifted from curiosity to admiration. She asked about methods, training, background, questions Lena answered with modest truth. "I used to work with children's outreach programs," Lena said. "Trauma care mostly, but after a family loss, I needed something quieter." Camille's pen slowed. "You mean to tell me you're the Lena Brooks from the Heartstone Project?" Lena hesitated. Was long time ago. Camille's voice carried a note of awe. I covered that project years back, the one that got government funding for rural trauma clinics. Everyone thought you left the field. Lena shrugged. Sometimes you leave a thing to remember why you started. Camille stared at her for a moment, then smiled. The public needs to know this story. Lena shook her head gently. If you tell it, make sure it's about the boy, not me. He's the reason any of this matters. Camille nodded, but the look in her eyes said she knew what the headline would be. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Lena sat by the window again. The house was quiet, not tense, just full of something new. Henry walked in, holding a folded newspaper from an earlier day, brow furrowed with thought. She's writing about you, he said. Lena didn't look up. Then she's writing about truth. You don't mind. Truth don't belong to me, sir. It belongs to whoever needs it. He nodded slowly. The world's going to see you for who you really are. Lena smiled at that, small, tired knowing. Maybe they'll see themselves too. That night, Camille's draft would begin to circulate, a story titled, The Woman Who Taught Silence to Speak, How One Caregiver Healed a Billionaire's Home. The world hadn't heard Lena's voice yet, but soon they would. Morning came with the sound of voices at the gate. Delivery vans, camera crews, reporters speaking names that used to mean nothing inside the estate. The quiet that had once defined the Caldwell mansion was gone, replaced by the low hum of recognition. Henry stepped out onto the front terrace, reading headlines on a phone that seemed suddenly too small for the moment. The Woman Who Taught Silence to Speak. From nanny to healer, Lena Brooks' unseen work. He looked toward the garden, where Lena stood beside Daniel, the two of them watching the koi drift beneath the pond's surface as though the world hadn't tilted. They're all talking about you, he said when he reached her. Lena didn't flinch. Let them, maybe it's time they talked about something good. Daniel tugged her sleeve. Are they mad at you? She crouched down, brushed a hand over his hair. No, baby, they're just surprised that quiet can be strong. Henry's voice softened. You never told me who you were. You never asked, she said, not accusing, just true. He nodded, a small, humbled smile flickering. I suppose I didn't know how. Inside, the phone lines rang non-stop. The foundation wanted Lena to speak at a conference. A hospital wanted her insight on trauma recovery. Even old colleagues reached out, names she hadn't heard in years. Mrs. Latham found her in the hallway, a stack of envelopes in her hands. They're calling you a miracle worker, she said. Lena sighed. I'm no miracle, just a woman who kept listening when everyone else stopped. Still, Mrs. Latham whispered, it's good to see truth walk proud for once. That evening, Henry gathered the staff in the grand hall, the same space that had once echoed with judgment. He stood beside Lena, his voice low but firm. I owe someone in this house an apology, he began. For too long, I let my own pain blind me. I mistook control for care and silence for healing. Miss Brooks reminded me that dignity speaks without raising its voice. He turned to her. You've given me back my son. I can never repay that. Lena's reply came soft but steady. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Caldwell. Just keep seeing him for who he is. That's payment enough. The room fell quiet. A few tears slipped down cheeks that once looked away from her. Respect had finally found its way home. Later, as the moon climbed high, Lena stood on the porch. The hum of the press had faded. The house was still again. Funny thing about truth, the narrator would murmur here, voice low, reflective. It doesn't knock. It walks in, sits down, and waits for the room to grow quiet enough to hear it. Through the window behind her, Daniel slept peacefully, a boy who had learned that silence wasn't punishment anymore. Lena breathed deep, the night air cool against her face. She didn't smile for the cameras or the praise. She smiled because peace, at last, felt like it belonged. The world outside the Caldwell gates buzzed for days, then slowly forgot. Headlines fade, people move on. But inside the mansion, truth didn't fade. It settled soft and permanent, like dust that refuses to be swept away. Henry Caldwell had changed, though few would ever see it. The man who once filled silence with orders now filled it with thought. At breakfast, he sat with Daniel instead of reading the paper. He listened, really listened. "Did you sleep all night?" he asked one morning. "Yeah," Daniel said between spoonfuls of cereal. "I dreamed about Mom." She was smiling. Henry's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. "Then she must be proud." From the kitchen doorway, Lena watched quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Healing had its own rhythm, and she'd learned not to rush the music. The house staff changed, too. Where once there were stiff greetings and lowered glances, now there was warmth, cups of coffee left for her, small acts of gratitude that didn't need words. One afternoon, Mrs. Latham found Lena sitting under the oak tree with Daniel, reading aloud from a worn book. The older woman sat beside her, hands folded in her lap. "I used to think this house was cursed," Mrs. Latham said softly. "All that money and not an ounce of peace." "Money can buy quiet," Lena said, "but peace, you earn that." They shared a small, knowing laugh. Henry called for Lena that evening. She found him in the study, the light from the fireplace painting gold across his face. On the table lay an envelope, heavy paper, his handwriting precise. "I want you to have this," he said. She shook her head. "If it's money, sir." "It's not, it's a letter of recommendation and an offer. The foundation wants to expand its work for children dealing with loss. I told them you lead it." Her eyes widened. "I came here to help one child, not to start a movement." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes one child is all it takes to change the world." She looked down at the letter for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll think about it." He accepted that. For the first time, he didn't press, didn't command. He simply said, "Thank you, Lena." "For what?" "For teaching me what love sounds like when it doesn't have to speak." Later, when the house was asleep, Lena sat alone in her small room. The moonlight cut through the curtains, laying silver stripes across the bedspread. She opened her old journal, the one she hadn't written in since before her own loss, and began a new entry. "He's healing," she wrote. "And maybe I am too." She paused, smiled, and set the pen down. Outside, a night breeze carried the faintest laugh from down the hall, Daniel's. It mixed with the rustle of the trees, the whisper of a home learning to breathe again. Days turned into weeks, the noise outside finally thinning into silence. The Caldwell estate no longer felt like a fortress. It breathed now, windows open, curtains moving with the wind. Henry still carried his grief, but it had softened. He walked the garden paths with Daniel, sometimes stopping where the hydrangeas grew thick. Lena often watched from the veranda, unseen, content to let them find their rhythm without her guiding hand. One afternoon Henry found her there, polishing the silver teapot. She refused to let the machines clean. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Every place runs its course, but this one still has work to do." He nodded. "You changed this house." "No," she said, "the truth did, I just let it in." That answer landed deeper than either expected. He left her with a small bow of gratitude, a gesture that meant more than words ever could. That night a soft rain fell, tapping the windows like gentle memory. Lena sat near Daniel's door, listening to him talk in his sleep, muffled words, half laughter, half dream. She whispered a quiet prayer, the kind you say when you've already been answered. In the morning, she found a letter slipped under her door, Henry's handwriting again. "We'll never forget the day peace moved into this house. If you decide to go, know that you leave it standing." She folded the note, pressed it against her heart, and looked around the room that had once been temporary. Now it felt whole. The narrator's voice would close this part slowly. Justice doesn't always come with witnesses or applause. Sometimes it's a man learning to listen, a child learning to laugh, a house learning to breathe. That's the quiet kind of justice, the one that stays after the cameras go home. The camera would linger on Lena walking down the corridor, light catching the simple cross on her necklace, her footsteps soft, sure, unhurried. The music fades into the hush of dawn. Morning broke clear and gentle. The rain had washed everything new. Birds traced songs across the open sky, and the mansion, once so heavy, now felt lighter, almost humble. Lena stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone lukewarm. She watched Daniel run barefoot through the wet grass, his laughter echoing off the stone walls that used to hold only silence. Henry appeared in the doorway, coat over his arm. "We're heading into town later," he said. "Daniel wants to buy flowers for his mother's garden." Lena smiled. "You make sure he picks the brightest ones." He nodded, then paused. "Will you be here when we get back?" "For a while," she said. "But houses like this don't need keepers forever. They just need to remember what peace feels like." Henry wanted to say more, but he didn't. He only reached out, took her hand gently, and said, "Thank you." When he left, the house fell into that warm, familiar quiet, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that protects it. Later that evening, Lena packed her small suitcase, one dress folded neatly over another, her old journal tucked between. Before closing the case, she paused to write a final note and left it on the nightstand for Henry and Daniel to find. "Don't let the silence scare you. It only asks to be filled with kindness." She closed the door behind her and stepped into the cool dusk. As she walked down the long drive, the narrator's voice would carry her forward, calm and certain. "Some battles are won without raising your voice, only standing tall. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply endures, and in the end, it changes everything it touches." The last image would be Lena at the gates, pausing as the wind lifted through the trees, her face turned toward the light, quiet, strong, unbroken. "If you've ever been doubted or dismissed," the narrator concludes, "this story is yours too. And if you believe in quiet strength, let the world know you're still standing."